Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam mudiraye. Shanvatam swakata krishnah punyashravana kirtanah hridayanto stihi badrani vidunoti suhritsatam nashtaprayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so in today's chapter, we are continuing. This is chapter 17. And the most important topics of this chapter, we would be able to glean those topics as we go forward. We will read verse by verse. But before we read verse by verse, I just wanted to share a couple of points. One of the points which I wanted to share is that this is a continuation of the previous chapter. The previous chapter saw the conversation between Dharma, the bull, which is symbolically the bull representing Dharma, talking to and having a conversation with Mother Earth, and the bull feeling despondent because the bull basically had lost 3/4 of its capacity. So, amongst the 4 pillars of Dharma, austerity, mercy, and cleanliness had already been given up. So, it's austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. These are the 4 pillars of Dharma. And austerity was seen in its full bloom in the Satya Yuga. And during the Satya Yuga, devotees could stay in deep meditation for many, many thousands of years because the longevity was very high. So the performance of austerity essentially meant, Hare Krishna, would you be able to put yourself on mute, please, everyone? Someone is, yeah, I think, okay. I think everybody could be on mute. So the 4 pillars of Dharma that are being enforced here are austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. And austerity was predominantly seen in full bloom in the Satya Yuga. It depleted in Treta. It further depleted in Dwapara. And in the present age, because we lack longevity, we just don't have any capacity to control our senses. During the process of Satya Yuga, the Satya Yuga process was Ashtanga Yoga. And one of the ingredients of success of Ashtanga Yoga was many, many thousands of years of austerity. The longevity of a human being in the Satya Yuga was equivalent to what is seen in the heavenly planets. So there was a lot of heavenly presence on earth. The consciousness in the atmosphere and the activities and the ideals were all equal to what was seen in the heavenly planets and higher planes of consciousness. As a consequence, the human beings at that point in time had a great responsibility to push towards goals of spirituality on their own capacity. Why could they push on their own capacity? Because the environment was surcharged with higher consciousness. There was a lot of presence of higher beings visiting and being a part of the realm. Then there was also the fact that they had a lot of capacity for austerity. They were engaging in Ashtanga Yoga. And in Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 parts of yoga, the yama, which is to be able to follow the basic morality, which is required of in society. Yama literally means that the rules of morality as laid down by Yamaraj, who is the father of Dharma, he is the embodiment of Dharma, or the keeper of Dharma in the world. So Yama being the first part of Ashtanga Yoga, Niyama being the rules and regulations, the second part of Ashtanga Yoga. The third part is the Hatha Yoga that we see in different yoga schools around earth today. So they just follow Hatha Yoga, and sometimes they lead sinful lives and then they engage in yoga. So in other words, there is no Yama, there is no Niyama, there is yoga. There's a lot of yoga going on these days. But it allows them to come in touch with the Vedic paradigm, so it does benefit them in the long run. But in reality, that it has to be preceded by the rules and regulations of morality, the basic morality. It has also to be governed by certain regulative principles of what you could do and what you couldn't do. And then there was yoga, then pranayama. Pranayama was basically a tool which allowed them to prolong the longevity or use the prana which they were given very effectively. Prana, the life force, which every one of us has, sometimes we feel bereft of prana. We feel as if we do not have the Shakti, the prana, for us to be able to pursue the goals of life. That could also be relationships, for instance. In most cases, my observation is that when prana is low, relationships suffer a lot. And as a consequence, people can't really keep in touch, because prana is all about being able to have the life force for us to be able to interact with society and interact with the world at large, and to interact with the duties that we have been given. So when prana becomes low, people generally feel so depleted and they feel so hollow inside that they start feeling that I can't even take care of myself. That is the consequence of my being able to keep in touch with the problems of the world. What would I be able to give when I can't take care of myself? So this is basically is a situation with many. But those days, pranayama was a part of the Ashtanga Yoga system, where the depletion of prana, which can happen during the pursuit of certain austerities, was replenished on a daily basis. And then all of this was done just to control senses, pratyahara. So there is no sense control in today's world. So what I am trying to give you is an example of the depletion of the four qualities of dharma over the ages: austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. There's a steady depletion. And this is reflective of how different things are in terms of our capacity to reach God. That is the reason why the process that we follow of Bhakti Yoga is the most effective process in this particular yuga, in Kali Yuga, where progress in itself is determined by our endeavor to some extent, but largely compensated by mercy of the Lord. So it's largely compensated, disproportionately compensated by what we don't do. And it requires that we commit ourselves to a process. It requires we submit ourselves to instruction. But for most part, the blessing that we receive from sadhus, the blessing that we receive from those who are more accomplished, is the way for Kali Yuga. As a consequence, there's great emphasis on sadhu sangha. There's great emphasis on coming in touch with those who are already accomplished, who have gained the faith, so that they could pass their faith on to us through the ear channel. When they speak, we receive faith, because their faith resides in the sound vibration of the individual who is speaking, and their faith reaches us when they speak and we hear attentively. So the dharma of Kali Yuga is to hear attentively. Why? Because austerity is gone. No one can perform austerities. You know, a simple Ekadashi fast is normally now done like an Ekadashi feast. You all have observed it, yeah? Twice a month, there's fasting for Ekadashi, but then you would notice that for most part, the feast on Ekadashi is more elaborate than it is on an ordinary day. Then for many people, just being fasting on any day, it doesn't work because they can't fast. There is no austerity. Why isn't there austerity? Why isn't there austerity? Why isn't there a capacity for austerity? There's one other reason. Ravindra, could you put yourself on mute, please? I'm hearing background noise.
Sorry.
Thank you. So why isn't there a capacity for austerity? Austerity is a Brahmanical quality. Cleanliness is a quality of Brahmanical nature. Yeah? Mercy is the Brahmanical quality. All of these are qualities of sattva, the mode of goodness. Because the mode of goodness has depleted itself to such an extent in the present age, we can't perform austerities, neither can we be clean, and there's a recognition of cleanliness. I know that my physical body is dirty, and as a consequence, someone else's physical body is also potentially dirty. This particular realization of the physical body being contaminated and the contamination of the physical body, this realization is not there. And when this realization is not there, there's a lot of lust. One contaminated body lusts for the second contaminated body. Yeah, this is not deprecating and shaming someone with a body, etc. This is not what the modern day New Age philosophers would bring up and start attacking, saying, "Oh, how could you call my body dirty?" No, I'm not calling your body dirty. I'm saying my body is dirty. So as a consequence, I can extend an inference that your body should also be dirty because the construct of the human body is similar. When that particular knowledge of contamination goes out of the mind, then lust emerges. So the depletion of cleanliness brings about lust. How do we understand this? This is contamination. The contamination of lust is nothing but the depletion of one of the legs of dharma. When the cleanliness is gone, lust is present. When the knowledge of the human self, knowledge of the soul, and what is covering the soul and what is not covering the soul is not fully understood, which means ignorance covers the soul, then one basically lusts after things which are inconsequential. When austerity is diminished and determination goes away. When austerity is diminished, determination goes away. Yeah? Austerity is diminished, determination goes away. So you have basically different regulative principles tied to these four different aspects as well, different regulative principles. So lust is connected to cleanliness. Mercy is connected to intoxication. When there's very heavy intoxication, there cannot be mercy, because the mode of ignorance which will come out at that point in time would cloud the mind to such an extent that the person can't be merciful. Yeah? They can't be merciful. So you have mercy gone, you have cleanliness gone, which is associated with lust as well. Then the determination for success is austerity. Determination for success is also austerity. Yeah? So you have meat eating, which is directly a corresponding quality because of the fact that there is no mercy. There are slaughterhouses around the world because there is no mercy. There's rampant lust. There's rampant intoxication. Yeah? All of these are simply products of depletion of dharma. They're just depletion of dharma, just blank depletion of dharma. There is a reason why we are being asked to follow regulative principles. Because unless we follow yama and niyama, basic morality, as demanded by society, and we follow niyama, which are regulative principles, we are not even embarking on the process of cleansing ourselves so that we could function as sadhakas, personalities who are trying to engage in some kind of sadhana. In Kali Yuga, all of this is absent. But when one makes an effort to regulate themselves and follows the principles of regulation as given by the Guru, then they receive mercy. So we are practically being held, I would say we are practically being blessed by the intervention of the spiritual master. We don't have capacity, we don't have the ability of performing austerities, we don't have the ability for cleanliness, we don't have the ability for mercy, we don't have the ability for anything. At that point in time, it is a spiritual master who steps in and compensates. He gives us basic intelligence and allows us to move forward. There was this question which was raised by the early disciples of Srila Prabhupada when they had just joined the movement. And some of them raised this question saying, we read in the Bhagavatam that there needs to be fundamental foundational dharma for us to be able to follow Krishna consciousness. But we don't seem to have any kind of knowledge where we could even claim that we followed basic foundational dharma. So how is it possible that we are being given Krishna consciousness directly by you? Srila Prabhupada looked very gravely at them and said, I compensated for what you lacked, which is the truth in Kali Yuga. That's the reason why you need to surrender. Someone has to compensate for what is lacking. And there needs to be a feeling of needing help. That's the reason why there is this particular aspect of Kali Yuga where you somehow or the other get attached to the Guru Parampara and receive benedictions from them. So there is a foundational principle being shared here in this chapter of the four pillars of Dharma. What remains is truth. What is truth? Of the four pillars of Dharma, the four legs of the bull is practically standing and moving around with one leg. Why isn't truth depleted? The bull has four legs and he is moving around in one leg. Dharma, the bull, is practically dragging himself with one leg, while three legs have already lost the ability to carry him. They have been depleted to such an extent that it is almost insignificant. Truth, the fourth leg of the bull in this particular situation, exists because Shastra exists, the Srimad Bhagavatam exists. This is the absolute truth. The preservation of the names of the Lord is done by Shastra. Have you noticed that we use the word Sat, Chit, Ananda? What is the meaning of Sat? Sat essentially means truth. Why is something called Sat? It is called Sat because it does not undergo change, as is the case with others. Truth, real truth, does not undergo change. That is the reason why Krishna said, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja, aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayasmi masucha. He said, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. Why did he use the word, give up all forms of occupational duty except surrendering unto me and I will protect you? He basically made the statement because everything else is based on a relative truth. Every connection, every form of duty which is there in this world as we are born is by relative truth. It is not fundamental by nature. Please understand the difference between what is relative and what is fundamental. What is absolute versus what is relative consideration. Absolute consideration is that which does not change. It remains absolute. Century after century, millennium after millennium, Sri Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita have the capacity to lead us back to Sat, Chit, Ananda. Lead us back to Krishna, engage us in his service. Millennium after millennium, the scriptures are not lost. That's the reason why they're called timeless. These pastimes are transcendental. They evoke transcendental qualities in the heart of one who hears them sincerely. Srimad Bhagavatam has been passed on. What is so glorious about this age is the holy names are being given as the means, and they are the best form of salvation. Chanting of Harinam is the best form of salvation, the best. Everybody benefits. And it is so simple, it is so straightforward. It is the means of salvation, it is the means of conquest in this particular age. Srimad Bhagavatam talks about the glories of the holy name in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. Srimad Bhagavatam motivates us to chant. Chanting motivates us to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. So everything in this particular yuga is about Shravanam. Hearing from someone who is qualified, who comes in a disciplic succession, receiving the faith of the person, of the parampara through that person whom we surrender to, and then allowing that faith to practically uproot our nations and compensating for all our incapacities. We are incapacitated at different levels. Whilst doing so, we have been given the fundamental principles of yama and niyama. What we have been given is a very fundamental moral code, and we have been given regulative principles are very fundamental too, because they improve our chances of being in the mode of goodness. We are practically simulating the legs of dharma, so that we at least situate ourselves in a foundation which allows us to make progress. That's the reason why the regulative principles have been given. These are regulative principles of freedom. The more we practice them and the more we accomplish our sadhana in terms of being able to accelerate in Krishna consciousness, the more free we are from the pangs of the mode of passion and ignorance. Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. Abhadreshu is that which is highly inauspicious. That which is inauspicious is one which causes great grief, is great lamentation. Passion. Passion causes ignorance. When unsatisfied, lust causes anger. Anger causes the loss of intelligence. So that's the beauty of what is being talked of here, where Dharma, the bull, is dragging himself with 1 foot. He has lost 3 feet. And when he's dragging himself with 1 foot, it is the foot of truthfulness which still remains. Austerity has been depleted. Mercy has been depleted. Cleanliness is gone. Now what remains is truthfulness. What is establishing Dharma here is truthfulness. How is the truth carried? It is carried by parampara. It is carried by disciplic succession. The truth is carried in sadhu shastra guru. When one adheres to the principles of Krishna consciousness through sadhu shastra guru in the proper disciplic succession, then they have great capacity for them to make advancement, because now they have full capacity of dharma. This is full capacity of dharma. You see, extraordinary austerity can be performed by a devotee, even though they have no capacity for it. Yeah, extraordinary austerity can be performed if they want to in the service of the Lord. There have been so many instances of austerities for pleasure of Krishna. So many instances. Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, Srila Sanatan Goswami, our Guru Parampara who lives in Vrindavan, they were in the mood of performing austerities so that they would not be distracted from the contribution to Krishna consciousness, simply because they would be maintaining the body in one way or the other. They were not attracted to austerities for the sake of austerities. They were not attracted to austerities for the sake of austerities. They were attracted to austerities so that they could use the time in the service of the Lord nicely. So they used to subsist on the bare minimum. They used to sleep under different trees in the night. And then they were pioneers. They had to set a very strong example, and they set it as well. They performed all kinds of austerities. They used to subsist almost on nothing. Why is this done? It is done basically to show that it is basically a quality which comes very easily when you become attracted to Krishna's names. It is not other way around. We are not born with the quality of austerity in Kali Yuga. Austerity comes as a motivation when we are motivated by spiritual force. Austerity comes as a motivation to please the Guru. Well, I want to please my Guru Maharaj, so as a consequence, let me take steps which are harsh, so that I would be able to do as much as I can for me to be able to serve my Guru. See, this motivation comes from Sadhu Shastra and Guru, from Shastra itself. So let's read through these texts, and we'll pick up the different points today, and we'll try and see where we could bring ourselves in terms of a discussion. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of go one text after another, and then I'll stop where I need to comment very specifically. So this is verse 1 of chapter 17 of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1. Sutta Goswami said, after reaching that place, Maharaj Parikshit observed that a lower caste Shudra, dressed like a king, was beating a cow and a bull with a club as if they had no owner. So this was basically not symbolic. It was an event which practically gave, it created an atmosphere of knowledge for King Parikshit to observe. You see, we talk about taking samples. This was sampling. This is particularly sampling. He was able to see one instance of a low-class person, meaning someone who was attached to their senses. Shudra means attached to the senses. They're still a part of the Vedic paradigm, but they're attached to their senses. So, and he was actually dressed inappropriately, projecting authority. This person who has no right to dress up like a king, because he was a Shudra, he was attached to his senses, was actually dressed like a king, and he was mercilessly beating up and breaking the legs of a bull and a cow. This was actually witnessed by Parikshit Maharaj. This was almost an omen or a prophecy that the age that is to come, which is Kali Yuga, would see cow slaughter and mercilessness to the highest extent. And it would also see Shudras, people with motivation for sense gratification, only occupying positions of power. So this was an event. It was like a sample. And this sample practically gave the king knowledge that this could become quite prevalent. So he had to do something. So at that point in time, he basically took up arms, but we're going to read about it further. He was quite astonished to see this sight, which means it must have been quite uncommon. When the Bhagavatam is mentioning, Ajamila, where Ajamila observed in the 6th canto, Ajamila observed a young woman, not a young woman, someone who was a low-class person, a woman of low character, embracing a drunk man in public space under a tree, and this Ajamila was so agitated seeing this particular display of lust that he lost his composure. Now, how common is this, especially in the West and even in India, where you see open display of affection in public places where it is completely inappropriate exchanges? Now it's commonplace. It was so uncommon that it was mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the 6th canto that it agitated the senses of Ajamila, where he practically gave up all his regulative principles and became attached to that low-class person. What I'm trying to say is this was a rarity. In the case in the 6th canto, that was a rarity. It was a rarity in the case of Parikshit Maharaj observing cows and bulls being ill-treated. It was a rarity. And also seeing someone who is filled with motivation for sense gratification being an authoritarian, a king for that matter. Yeah? So that was a rarity as well. It was very disturbing a sight because you all in a sudden had Shudras or someone who is attached to sense gratification holding on to power. And it is the most common phenomenon that we see in the world today. It's not uncommon. So many, practically most of the leaders whom we have around the world today, managing countries, corporations in positions of power, are Shudras. They are Shudras because they don't have any other motivation other than wanting to gratify their senses at different levels. They have no control over their senses. And as a consequence, they have no vision of the future. They have no business being in the position of leaders. But that's the situation. This sampling was observed by Parikshit Maharaj. The bull was as white as a white lotus flower. He was terrified of the Shudra who was beating him. And he was so afraid that he was standing on one leg, trembling and urinating. The bull was practically so afraid that he was passing urine, and he was so terrified of the tremendous amount of pain that was being inflicted. But he was very white as a white lotus flower. Although the cow is beneficial because one can draw religious principles from her, she was now rendered poor and calfless. Her legs were being beaten by a Shudra. There were tears in her eyes, and she was distressed and weak. She was hankering after some grass in the field. Maharaj Parikshit, well equipped with arrows and bow, and seated on a gold-embossed chariot, spoke to him, the Shudra, with a deep voice sounding like thunder. Oh, who are you? You appear to be strong, and yet you dare kill within my protection those who are helpless. By your dress, you pose yourself to be a godly man, a king, but by your deeds, you are opposing the principles of twice-born Kshatriyas. You rogue, do you dare beat an innocent cow because Lord Krishna and Arjun, the carrier of the Gandiva bow, are out of sight? Since you are beating the innocent in a secluded place, you are considered a culprit and therefore deserve to be killed. So what we notice in the Srimad Bhagavatam is that when they find deviation, the punishment standard seems to be extreme, quite severe. You notice here that he saw this person beating the cow and the calf, and the bull, and this was enough for Parikshit Maharaj to wanting to actually kill him. So when he found deviation, the standard of punishment in the previous ages was severe. It was so severe that they had to deal with it in a very severe way. They understood that the mode of ignorance does not, basically, you can't really argue with someone who has a mode of ignorance. You can't really sit and then present logical points because they are not quite Brahminical, they're not intellectual where you can really give them points for them to consider because they're not reasonable, they're in the mode of ignorance. So what they used to do was they understood the language of pain. So they used to inflict pain, which is what is being seen here. And in certain cases, hurting the cow and the bull was so extreme that Parikshit Maharaj basically decided that he wanted to actually kill him. He drew his weapons. Then Maharaj Parikshit asked the bull, oh, who are you? Are you a bull as white as a white lotus? Are you a demigod? You have lost 3 of your legs and are moving on only 1. Are you some demigod causing us grief in the form of a bull? So he was quite astonished. He seems to be bewildered seeing this sight because he has never seen a bull and a cow being beaten up. So this is quite astonishing. So he's asking questions, who are you? What is this unusual sight? And today's world, it is so common to see cow slaughter. In those days, it was so unusual that it practically made King Parikshit ask questions and assume that there must be something else behind this. Now, the first time in a kingdom well protected by the arms of the kings of the Kuru dynasty, I see you grieving with tears in your eyes. Up until now, no one on earth has ever shed tears because of royal negligence. And he was actually referring to his dynasty. When he says up until now, he was practically talking about all the way up to Lord Sri Ram. He was bringing this up because when these great personalities ruled the planet, there was no question of deviation and the innocent being hurt and the innocent being given pain. So he was actually quite aggrieved. Parikshit, as a king, was very aggrieved to see this extraordinary sight of innocent creatures such as the bull and a cow being hurt and given grief by someone who definitely was not, in knowledge. O son of Surabhi, you need lament no longer now. There is no need to fear this low-class Shudra. And O mother cow, as long as I am living as the ruler and subduer of all envious men, there is no cause for you to cry. Everything will be good for you. So the first principle of pacification is to pacify the emotions. You first pacify the emotions. You don't apply rules and regulations. You pacify the emotions, and that is being seen here. So he is basically dealing with the emotions first. He's pacifying the emotions. He is giving them protection. He's saying, do not worry, I'm here now. So do not be in fear. And then he's telling the cow, you don't worry, you're now under my care. You don't have to have any cause for crying. Everything is going to be good for you. So he's basically pacifying the emotions. O chaste one, the king's good name, duration of life, and good rebirth vanish when all kinds of living beings are terrified by miscreants in his kingdom. It is certainly the prime duty of the king to subdue first the sufferings of those who suffer. Therefore, I must kill this most wretched man because he's violent against other living beings. So this practically means that the punishment that he wanted to give was to take the life of the fellow who was causing harm to the fundamental principles of religion, the bull and the cow. He, Maharaj Parikshit, repeatedly addressed and questioned the bull. Thus, O son of Surabhi, who has cut off your 3 legs? In the state of kings who are obedient to the laws of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, there is no one as unhappy as you. This is the lamentation of Parikshit. O bull, you're offenseless and thoroughly honest. Therefore, I wish all good to you. Please tell me of the perpetrator of these mutilations which blackmail the reputations of the sons of Pritha. Pritha is Mother Kunti. The sons of Pritha are the Pandavas. So Parikshit Maharaj is remembering his lineage and he's raising this point saying, in my lineage, how could it be that you basically could be hurt so badly? One moment. Whoever causes offenseless living beings to suffer must fear me anywhere and everywhere in the world. By curbing dishonest miscreants, one automatically benefits the offenseless. An upstart living being who commits offenses by torturing those who are offenseless shall be directly uprooted by me, even though he be a denizen of heaven with armor and decorations. This is very important. Parikshit Maharaj saying, I don't care. I do not care who is responsible for this, even if it is someone who is from the heavens and who carries the blessing of eternal life, because in a relative sense, the heavenly beings have many, many years of life as compared to human beings. So they're called eternal in the context of a human being. So someone lives 100 years, while the devas, because their body is so subtle and has a much more longevity than ours, our body is gross and we leave this body. And if you have a subtle body, you live longer because it doesn't undergo the same degree of destruction as the gross body does. And as a consequence, he is making the statement saying, even if it is someone who is, he's using the word amarat, amaratishyapi sangadam. Amartyasapi Sangadam. Basically, Amartyasapi Sangadam. Why is he saying this? Because Sakshad Amartyasapi Sangadam. Amartyasapi, Amara means eternal, one who does not have death, but it is relative. When the day of Brahma ends, everybody goes, but then in a relative context, they live millions of years more than earthly beings. And as a consequence, he's addressing them as people who are Amaras, who are demigods. Even if they come and they have done this, they can't stand before me. Now, what is it which is giving such confidence to Maharaj Parikshit that he could face the Devas in battle? What is it which gives him such confidence? You see, when we are in trouble, I'm talking about you and I, we search for Kavach mantras. We search for the Varaha Kavach, we search for the Narasimha Kavach, we take shelter of the Lord to the Kavach mantras. The more fundamental Kavach, which will protect us at all times, is the Kavach of Dharma. If someone has hurt a cow and a bull, they have committed adharma, which essentially means they have been bereft and they have been deprived of all good qualities. And even if they carry deadly weapons and they are eternal in one sense, I will fight them because they are no longer of any good quality. There's a depletion of life. So he's basically addressing the fact that if someone has committed adharma, then they have no choice. Because dharma is the first kavach. Reading Shastra and following Sadhu Shastra and Guru is the first kavach. You want to wear a kavach to protect yourself from mishaps of life, wear the kavach of Dharma. Dharma as enunciated by Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita. Wear that kavach, then there is complete protection. That is what is being referred to here. The supreme duty of the ruling king is to give all protection to law-abiding persons and to chastise those who stray away from the ordinances of scriptures in ordinary times when there is no emergency. So in other words, scripturally, if there are rules and regulations, if there are emergencies, there have been deviations. And this is basically for self-preservation. So for example, when they talk about meat eating and someone is being forced to eat meat because they have been completely deprived of any other source of survival, then that is a violation of religion. But again, that's an emergency, so there's a little bit of a counter. And there's some amount of, I would say, weightage given because self-preservation is more important than, I would say, following any other aspect of it. So this is an argument which is being posed. Now, there isn't any kind of lack in the world for vegetarian food. There isn't any lack in the world for food which is basically according to the scriptures. We really shouldn't be thinking that there's an issue. None of us are sitting in forests performing austerities where we can't eat anything and suddenly we come across circumstances of self-preservation where we may have to do something which is outside of the boundary of scriptures. We don't have such emergencies here, so we shouldn't really take shelter of those emergencies. But it is being spoken of here is that dharma has to be adhered at all times. There can be stray instances when there's an emergency. The personality of religion said, this is the bull, Dharma, these words just spoken by you befit a person of the Pandava dynasty. Captivated by the devotional qualities of the Pandavas, even Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead, performed duties as a messenger. Yeah, Krishna was a messenger, somewhat of a low-class situation when you're ruling a kingdom. He was a king. He was a supreme person. At the same time, for his devotees, he was ready to take on the role of a messenger, a charioteer, etc. O greatest among human beings, it is very difficult to ascertain the particular miscreant who has caused us sufferings, because we are bewildered by all the different opinions of the theoretical philosophers. This is a very careful answer given by the bull. The bull is saying, the bull obviously knows because the Shudra has beaten the bull and the legs are broken. But the bull is replying, O greatest among human beings, it is very difficult to ascertain the particular miscreant who has caused our sufferings, because we are bewildered by all the different opinions of the theoretical philosophers. Ultimately, a devotee would not accuse a perpetrator of a crime against them as being directly responsible for their suffering. They would simply feel that Krishna has decided to bring us closer by this particular calamity, and this could have been so much worse, except that Krishna has made it easier. So this is basically the mood of a devotee. That's what we're seeing here. This bull is basically saying, I do not know who caused this suffering. He's getting into philosophy, but in reality he knows, but he's not wanting to name anybody. Why doesn't he want to name anybody? Because of two reasons. The first reason is it is Krishna who is ultimately responsible. So how is Krishna responsible? Our karma is responsible. But then Krishna is responsible because he didn't prevent it. So let's assume that our karma dictates that we fall into a pit while walking on the road. Yeah? So someone who dug the pit, someone who has kept the road dark, someone who basically didn't do what they had to do, these are all different personalities who are responsible. But then we fall into the pit. We hurt ourselves and we wake up and then we get up and we say, it was Krishna's will, what could we do? Devotees accept everything as Krishna's will. Even if it is karma, even if they know who has done it, they accept it as Krishna's will because that is indeed the truth. Why would we say that? Because ultimately, even though Krishna is not directly responsible, Krishna, in one sense, is responsible at the level where he could have prevented it in certain ways. Could be an argument which is being posed by others. But in reality, the other way of looking at it is even if our karma is patently responsible for us falling into that pit in the dark road, we reflect on it and we say, Krishna, it is your desire. So even if we think that someone else is responsible, we attribute responsibility to Krishna and his desire to put us through some kind of a challenge. And by doing so, bringing us closer to him. So when you attribute a misfortune to Krishna and say, Krishna, this is your desire, even if that misfortune was because of our karma, because we are involving Krishna, it becomes Krishna conscious. It becomes what we would call a spiritual opportunity. It becomes a spiritual opportunity. How do we understand this further? We fundamentally understand that Krishna is responsible, so we accept everything as Krishna is doing. By accepting everything as Krishna is doing, we are introducing Krishna into our life. Just as much as we buy an apple from the market, we bring it before Krishna. The apple is just matter, but if we introduce Krishna, it becomes spiritual. In the same way, if we have challenges in life, even though our challenges are distinctly due to karmic reactions, we basically say, Krishna, this is your decision. I'm going through whatever I'm going through because ultimately, Krishna, this is your choice. We kind of accept it as Krishna's will. And we also acknowledge the fact that it could have been far, far worse. It is because of your intervention, Krishna, it has become bearable. Even if it was our karma, when we make this statement internally and externally, even if you're pretending to make this statement, Krishna gets involved. When he gets involved, everything turns auspicious. The so-called inauspiciousness, which could only lead to suffering, would instead become a vehicle for our spiritual awakening. Let's take one more example. Putana, the demoness. There is history. There is history with Putana, the demoness, being someone in the previous yuga who wanted basically to have Lord Vamana as a mother. And then she became very inimical when he pushed Bali Maharaj down with his foot. Right? This was Bali Maharaj's sister who wanted Lord Vamana, who looked extraordinarily good. He was a very, very small lad. He was a Brahminical lad. He was very small and yet extraordinarily powerful looking and very nice looking. So she wanted him as a son. But then Vamanadev basically pushed her brother down to the earth and she became very angry. And she said, maybe the next time when I come into your life, I want to be your mother, but I will betray you. So she becomes Putana. And when she comes as Putana, she smears poison on her breast and suckles Krishna, allows Krishna to suckle her breast. When Krishna suckles her breast, he practically takes the life air out of Putana. And even though it was an inauspicious act, which was not necessarily what we would call as pratikul, it was against the desires of the Supreme Lord, in terms of she was not favorable to him, she receives a place in the heavens, in the spiritual kingdom, as one of his mothers. She becomes a nursemaid in the eternal Goloka. This liberation occurs. Why? Because she was pretending to be his mother. She was pretending to be Krishna's mother, so she was given the place of a mother. So even if we pretend that Krishna, whatever I'm going through is your will, and we are not 100% sincere, but we attribute our circumstances of life to him, and we start meditating on the fact that it could be a lot worse, but you have made it so much easier, then you will see Krishna intervening from that moment on. It would no longer be you and your karma. It would be you, your karma, and Krishna. It's a fascinating, fascinating theology, and it is very, very powerful as a meditation. It's very powerful in terms of actually for devotees, for them to be able to transform their difficulties and understand them to be stepping stones for success. So here the bull is saying, I don't know. And the bull is saying, telling King Parikshit, there were so many different people because it's difficult to ascertain the particular miscreant who has caused us sufferings, because we are bewildered by all the different opinions of theoretical philosophers. Some of the philosophers who deny all sorts of duality declare that one's own self is responsible for his personal happiness and distress. Others say that superhuman powers are responsible, while yet others say that activity is responsible, and gross materialists maintain that nature is the ultimate cause. There are different people with different opinions. There are also some thinkers who believe that no one can ascertain the cause of distress by argumentation, nor know it by imagination, nor express it by words. O sage amongst kings, judge for yourself by thinking over all this with your own intelligence. Now the bull is provoking philosophical thought and telling him, who should I attribute this particular condition of mind to? Sutta Goswami said, O best among the Brahmanas, the Emperor Parikshit, thus hearing the personality of religion speak, was fully satisfied, and without mistake or regret, he gave his reply. The king said, O you who are in the form of a bull, you know the truth of religion, and you're speaking according to the principle that the destination intended for the perpetrator of irreligious acts is also intended for one who identifies the perpetrator. What does he mean by this statement? If someone causes harm to you, and you somehow or the other feel a tremendous need for revenge, and you are picking up a hot, burning coal in your hand, waiting for the perpetrator of harm to pass by so that you could throw the coal at them, whilst you wait with the piece of burning coal, waiting for the perpetrator of harm, that piece of burning coal is also burning your own palm. Isn't that the case? Is that when we carry a lot of, I would say, misgivings about people in our hearts, thinking that they are basically responsible for a particular circumstance, and we are unable to let go, until such time we are not able to let go, we are suffering the same situation again and again and again. And when we are suffering the same situation, it is like carrying a hot piece of coal in your hand, waiting for the fellow who did you harm so that you could throw the piece of coal at the person and then be relieved that you did what had to be done. What would we call it? Quid pro quo, I guess? I'm not sure. I could be using the wrong Latin term. That's my memory. Anyways, the point being that if we don't have the capacity for mercy, then we don't have the capacity for forgiveness, then we are doing things which are very harmful to us. We are carrying our past in our heart. We are unable to let go of the past, and we are waiting for the perpetrator of harms, and then we're just waiting for that person to come by. And until such time, we're going to burn with the same circumstances that initially gave us so much pain. That is what is being mentioned here, saying that if you name the perpetrator, your destination, your experience is also going to be the same as the perpetrator. On the other hand, if you realize that somehow or the other this was the will of the Lord and He loves you so much, He could cause you no harm, He has practically made an arrangement for you to come closer to Him, but at the same time, He has not given you any cause of grief because He has reduced the actual suffering, which could have been far worse. Then Krishna gets into the situation. Krishna becomes a part of our circumstance in our lives, and as a consequence, we are able to get realizations. This is the reason why Lord Jesus Christ, when He was crucified, He was able to forgive. If Jesus was suffering, He wouldn't have been able to forgive. He would have probably been praying that, give me the power so that I could just extinguish all these people who put me into such harm. Lord Jesus was able to forgive because He was not suffering. He was in pain. Yes, his body was broken. He was crucified. He was in deep pain, but He was not suffering. He had already attributed His circumstance to the will of the Lord. He had already become an instrument, and He accepted His particular station and His suffering as that which has been arranged by the Supreme Lord Himself. And because He had accepted it, the Supreme Lord became involved. And by His involvement and the surrender, He was experiencing spiritual bliss, and that allowed Him to forgive. When you are in deep, deep pain and you're also suffering, you can't forgive. When you can be in deep pain, but you're not suffering because you know that it is the will of your beloved, and your beloved loves you so much that He can't really cause you any harm, then at that point in time, you're ready to forgive because you feel you've come much closer to your beloved than you ever were before. And this is a very special arrangement. So it's a matter of being able to understand and accept reality the way it should be. If you want to accept reality, accept spiritual reality. The circumstances of misfortune are a daily habit in this world. It is just the way the world is designed. But when we introduce Krishna consciousness and we accept our life of every moment as being arranged by Krishna, then it gives us the strength to accept things, and it is real. This is not a philosophical poser. It is not something where it's not mental jugglery. It is not mental jugglery where I'm merely convincing my mind saying, this is Krishna's arrangement. So this is not some kind of, I would say, mental jugglery or some kind of a some kind of a means to pacify my mind. It is the truth. This is exactly how Krishna gets involved. Krishna in His name can get involved. Krishna can be involved in memory. Krishna can get involved when we invoke His presence and say that my life as I see it today is your arrangement. If you say that in front of Krishna, it will become His arrangement. It will no longer be of our making. It will become Krishna's making. Then Krishna can use us. If this life as we see it today is your arrangement, is realized by us, then we have the ability to give the reins of life to the person who has made the arrangement. And by giving the reins of life to the person who has made the arrangement, we would then have a life which would be purposeful, meaningful, which would be contributing to the rest of the world. This is very, very fundamental. Can you just imagine that how deep these verses are? This is exceptional techniques of spiritual growth that are being shared here. Similar to the Bhagavad Gita, there are many verses in the Bhagavad Gita which also affirm the same truth. But here, this is very clear. So they're talking about who hurt you, and the bull says, I don't know, but you should know, Parikshit. And then Parikshit says, okay, I figured you out. And he is giving this reply. So isn't it fascinating to see this? Thus, it is concluded that the Lord's energies are inconceivable. No one can estimate them by mental speculation or by word jugglery. In the age of Satya, truthfulness, your 4 legs were established by the 4 principles of austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. But it appears that 3 of your legs are broken due to rampant irreligion in the form of pride. Austerity brings pride. Why does it bring pride? Then a person falls down. When someone performs austerity, the chances are they develop mystic powers. And when they have these mystic powers, they think that they are God. There's a lack of humility. So they are basically on their own and they fall down. Once the mystic power is diminished, they fall down. So austerity is broken by pride. Cleanliness is broken by lust for men and women correspondingly. And mercy is broken by intoxication. What is left is truthfulness. Truthfulness is basically there because Shastra, Sadhu, and Guru exist, and they are able to intervene and re-establish Dharma. These are qualities of Brahmanical life, and these are qualities of the mode of goodness. So basically, the mode of goodness is supported by austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. That's why it's so difficult to be in the mode of goodness these days, because three of those aspects are missing. Austerity is missing because even a little austerity, the person becomes filled with pride. Or there is a lot of pride. As a consequence, they can't really engage in too much austerity. It just results in pride. You are now standing on one leg only, which is your truthfulness, and you're somehow or the other hobbling along. But quarrel personified Kali, flourishing by deceit, is also trying to destroy that leg. Deceit is trying to destroy that leg. The twists and the turns of Shastra. Yeah? There are so many different versions of the Bhagavad Gita. So many different versions that Prabhupada had to name his Bhagavad Gita as it is. He had to call it as it is because there were so many different versions. By the time Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur came into the scene, he was born in the early 1800s. Finding a single copy of the Bhagavatam, a copy of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, was extraordinarily challenging because there were so many different spurious commentaries. Of course, there wasn't the printing press, it was all handwritten script. But in addition to that, there were so many different interventions by different groups who had contaminated the original scripture to such an extent that for Bhaktivinoda Thakur to find a copy which was written by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and the predecessor acharyas was very difficult. Then he came upon the works and then he basically re-established the truth. So the point I'm trying to make is deceit, trying to basically be duplicitous, concealing the true message by covering it by the cheating message. Kaitava Dharma. What does it mean? Kaitava Dharma means basically telling people that you are practicing religion for the purpose of the objectives of life, etc. In the sense, deceiving them of the true fruit of religion. So if you write the Srimad Bhagavatam in the early 1800s, there were so many different commentaries by people who were devious that there were so many different deviations from our Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had a very difficult time just re-establishing the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Literally, single-handedly, he rewrote and created a foundation again for our benefit. We would be nowhere without the work of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Because by the 1800s, because of the age of Kali, deceit had covered over the truth. But because Sadhu, Shastra, Guru, they come periodically, he unearthed the truth again and represented it. Yeah? Because in this particular yuga, truth still prevails by the forms of Sadhu, Shastra, Guru. So he came and he basically removed the deceit. So being attached to the parampara is so important because they give you help in being able to stick to the truth. The burden of the earth was certainly diminished by the personality of Godhead and by others as well. When he was present as an incarnation, all good was performed because of his auspicious footprints, Krishna's lotus footprints. Now the she here refers to Mother Earth, the chaste one, being unfortunately forsaken by the personality of Godhead, laments her future with tears in her eyes, for now she is being ruled and enjoyed by lower class men who pose as rulers. What do we mean by the chaste one? The chaste one is one who is chaste to her beloved. Mother Earth is chaste to Krishna. She is his property. When he appears as sorry about this. when he appears as Lord Varaha, can you hear me, devotees?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Because there was just an interruption, so I wasn't sure. When he appears as Lord Varaha, Krishna basically retrieves Mother Bhumi. Couple of days back, I took a few devotees to Mathura. They were visiting Vrindavan, and we went to this very ancient Varahadev temple, which is basically, it was an amazing place because it is still being preserved by the local Brahmin families in Mathura. It's very close to the Yamuna. And in this Varahadev temple, you see him upholding the earth and basically maintaining the earth. So the point is, she is chaste to her Lord. She is chaste to her Lord. She belongs to Krishna. Whatever she has here on this planet belongs to Krishna. And that is being seen here. And that is the reason why she's being called a chaste one. She's chaste. And why is she lamenting? She's lamenting because others who are lower class people who are engaging in sense gratification, they are posing as rulers and they have usurped the property of the Lord. Maharaj Parikshit, who could fight 1,000 enemies single-handedly, thus pacified the personality of religion and the earth. Then he took up a sharp sword to kill the personality of Kali, who is the cause of all irreligion. When the personality of Kali understood that the king was willing to kill him, he at once abandoned the dress of a king and, under pressure of fear, completely surrendered to him, bowing his head. Can't you see that today's world? Who bows to whom? You bow to those who have the power to cause harm to you. Yeah, everybody bows to America, maybe Russia, because they have the most amount of weapons to kill each other. Yeah. So these days, it's always the power of who is going to hurt you the most. You bow down if you're afraid. Otherwise, you don't bow down because there isn't any good quality or ability to recognize good quality. So when Kali saw Parikshit Maharaj was meaning to do what he said he would, he abandoned his dress or posturing, and he immediately, under the pressure of fear, only fear, he surrendered to him. It was not anything else. It was not knowledge. It was fear. Why? Because this age is the mode of ignorance. The mode of ignorance bows down to fear. And then he started surrendering to him, bowing his head. Maharaj Parikshit, who was qualified to accept surrender and worthy of being sung in history, did not kill the poor surrendered and fallen Kali, but smiled compassionately, for he was kind to the poor. The moment there is surrender, Maharaj Parikshit said, okay, since you're surrendering, then I don't need to kill you. The king thus said, we have inherited the fame of Arjuna. Therefore, since you have surrendered yourself with folded hands, you need not fear for your life, but you cannot remain in my kingdom, for you are the friend of irreligion. If the personality of Kali, irreligion, is allowed to act as man-god or an executive head, certainly irreligious principles like greed, falsehood, robbery, incivility, treachery, misfortune, cheating, quarrel, and vanity will abound. Therefore, friend of irreligion, you do not deserve to remain in a place where experts perform sacrifices according to truth and religious principles for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In all sacrificial ceremonies, although sometimes the demigod is worshipped, the Supreme Lord Personality of Godhead is worshipped because he is the super soul of everyone and exists both inside and outside like the air. Therefore, it is he only who awards all welfare to the worshipper. Sri Sutta Goswami said, the personality of Kali, thus being ordered by Maharaj Parikshit, began to tremble in fear. Seeing the king before him like Yamaraj, ready to kill him, Kali spoke to the king as follows. O your majesty, though I may live anywhere and everywhere under your order, I shall but see you with bow and arrows wherever I look. Therefore, O chief among the protectors of religion, please fix some place for me where I can live permanently under the protection of your government. Under the protection of government. So sin, personified deviation, personified ignorance has to live somewhere. Maharaj Parikshit, thus being petitioned by the personality of Kali, gave him permission to reside in places where gambling, drinking, prostitution, and animal slaughter were performed. So gambling, drinking, prostitution, and animal slaughter. So basically, these are the counters or the opposite sides of austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. So you have gambling, drinking, prostitution, animal slaughter. So he is going to reside there. The personality of Kali asked for something more, and because of his begging, the king gave him permission to live where there is gold. Because wherever there is gold, there's also falsity, intoxication, lust, envy, and enmity. Thus, the personality of Kali, by the directions of Maharaj Parikshit, the son of Uttara, was allowed to live in those 5 places. Therefore, whoever desires progressive well-being, especially kings, religionists, public leaders, brahmanas, and sannyasis, should never come in contact with the 4 above-mentioned irreligious principles. Thereafter, the king re-established the lost legs of the personality of religion, the bull, and by encouraging activities, he sufficiently improved the condition of the earth. The most fortunate emperor, Maharaj Parikshit, who was entrusted with the kingdom of Hastinapur by Maharaj Yudhishthira when he desired to retire to the forest, is now ruling the world with great success due to his being glorified by the deeds of the kings of the Kuru dynasty. Maharaj Parikshit, the son of Abhimanyu, is so experienced that by dint of his expert administration and patronage, it has been possible for you to perform a sacrifice such as this. Now, this ends the chapter. I just wanted to comment a little bit on the verse which talked about Kali residing in gold. See, Kali residing in gold meant if there is going to be an excessive flow of or availability of gold, then it basically is going to encourage all kinds of illicit activities. But in reality, gold being produced naturally doesn't have the ability to expand itself to such an extent that it can encourage all these activities because it is limited. It is quite limited. So the kings those days had currency which was directly pieces of gold. But the modern day, what they did was they had something called a gold standard. If you had to look up the $100 bill or a single dollar bill of the 1900s, the early 1900s, the dollar bill of America, you could see in the particular dollar bill a particular statement that you could exchange it for an equivalent amount of gold. You could take the dollar, and the dollar was directly tied to an equivalent amount of gold, which was held by the gold reserve of the country in America. So there was this equivalency at some point. At some point in the past, there was an equivalency where you could give paper currency, and the paper currency had a statement saying, this is worth so much ounces of whatever quantity of gold. You could take it to the bank, and the bank will give you real gold. Then in between, they abolished the gold standard. They abolished the gold standard. They first made it very restricted, and then they abolished the gold standard. So what we have now is extraordinary amount of paper currency floating around in the world. And as a consequence, there's excessive amount of currency which is not in the control of the government, because the government itself does not know fully well as to what the impact of its currency is. Causes a lot of basic activities such as gambling, intoxication, etc. to happen because now there's an excess. The early days, during the time of Maharaj Parikshit, the way the king used to control sinful activities was to literally control currency. And the currency itself was coins, gold coins. So he would control the amount of gold, and by controlling the amount of gold that was released into the public, he would practically control activities which could take place. He will only release as which is required. But then when you have a standard where you can just print money as it is being done today, then it will go after things where you have no control over. You just have no control over all of this. So what is being said here is particularly quite poignant, that Kali resides in gold. That's why gold had to be restricted, because gold was assumed to be the actual standard of exchange. But when the standard of exchange became paper, now there is really no control. So it is held by all people. It is held in all kinds of places. The government basically can trace it, but then they do have issues. Beyond a certain point, they can't really trace it. How do you control paper? You can't control paper because successive governments printed large volumes. The worth of the dollar has come down, but yet you still have a tremendous amount of currency, paper currency floating around. So, the king those days had control over the pieces of gold. Nature, which is Krishna himself, had control over how much gold is made available at a certain price. But now that is not the case, because it's paper currency, it's all broken down. So the point I'm just trying to make is that statement that gold is where Kali is going to reside is a true statement. And that is how kings used to control sinful activity in the kingdom, by preventing the amount of gold that is available in the kingdom for them to be able to use for such activities. They would control gold. And then since it was also controlled by Krishna, a country which is highly deviant would be attacked by a country which is much stronger karmically, and they would take over all their gold. This is how it used to happen. But in any case, the point which we are trying to make here is that this chapter had such wonderful fine points. The points about dharma, the points about austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness, and the corresponding deviations where austerity causes pride if it goes berserk, which is the opposite. And then you have cleanliness, which if it is absent, then one does not realize the nature of the physical body. They can't really realize the nature of what is dirty and what is clean. So there's a lack of cleanliness, and they participate in acts which are extraordinarily dirty in certain, they just don't have the sense. So cleanliness equates lust towards men and women correspondingly, respectively. And then you have mercy directly related to what we would call as basically caused by intoxication. And this lack of mercy is being seen by slaughter. So when we want to re-establish religion, when we want to re-establish dharma, you start re-establishing the pillars of religion, which is what Parikshit Maharaj did. So he banished irreligion and he re-established religion by giving a lot of emphasis to austerity, mercy, truthfulness, and cleanliness. When you strengthen those qualities, the mode of goodness thrives. When you strengthen the mode of goodness, then transcendental pursuits also thrive. So that's the subject matter for this chapter. So we'll end here. We'll see if you have any comments or questions.
So regarding the gold, on this point, should devotees not handle gold or keep gold or be attracted to gold?
Well, we follow the principle of Yukta Vairagya, where if someone gives you a kilo of gold, you employ it in the service of the Lord, rather than being bothered by what it carries from the perspective, because gold belongs to Krishna. So you give back what belongs to Krishna himself. So in that sense, it isn't a liability. I wouldn't say that anything is a liability as long as we understand who is the proprietor. For many of us, either we are Shudras, where we can't really have a complicated life. So we need to have something which is less complicated so that we can take care of a business of eating, sleeping, mating, defending, and then focus on service. Or we are aspiring for Brahminical life, which also requires simplicity in this business of eating, mating, sleeping, defending. We need to have an occupation which doesn't really cost too much in terms of, I would say, agitation. Some devotees are dedicated to this and they have the ability to offer their earnings to Krishna fully. then there's really nothing wrong with it. But it is their capacity. Yeah, it is their capacity to do so. What is, as we would call it, what is poison for one becomes nectar for the other, and what is nectar for one becomes poison for the other. So it's all very contextual in the present juncture. But if it can be engaged in the service of the Lord, then I guess you could bypass a lot of strictures in that sense.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Sure, absolutely.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribol?
Following on from that, I kind of just wanted to ask if it's okay to kind of use things like credit cards or cryptocurrency like bitcoins, like kind of fake currency. Should we kind of avoid that, those type of forms of currency?
Actually, no. I don't really think there's a position against any of that. As I said, having a credit card for that matter could be easy simply because you can't carry paper currency, these days. That's one. The second point is about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, etc. Actually, cryptocurrencies in general don't have much value. In reality, we don't know what their values are tied to. Paper currency is tied to the tax which the government receives. Cryptocurrencies are a belief system. You need faith in them. It's as simple as that. There really isn't anything which is in the background which can give them value. And it is generally being used by people who are surreptitious, who are into something deviant, because you can't trace it beyond a certain point. Does it make sense? In the sense that there really isn't any case against any of this.
Thank you.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Any other question or comment that we could take?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribol?
Yeah, I mean now you mentioned that like if you realize that if anything happens in the life, if you realize that it is arrangement of Krishna to teach us something, but there are situations where we get something unexpected which we didn't never think, like somebody cheat us, but it might be like, is it like superstitious thinking that Krishna arrangement, or because I may be neglecting the responsibilities of my family as well, because if I solve that will help my fulfilling the responsibility of the family. So is it like superstition?
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. So sorry, please finish. Yeah, I understand now, but I understand. Yeah. See, here's the thing. These are actually two different points, not one. It is one thing to assume that an unfortunate occurrence in our life is the arrangement of Krishna, and consequently one has the ability to basically surrender and do what is best with the intelligence that Krishna gives us to progress further in Krishna consciousness. That's what I was talking about. It is another to neglect what is practically required in the circumstances. In Krishna consciousness, there are two principles. Number one, we understand that everything and anything is basically fundamentally going to be Krishna who is going to grant results. So we may do a lot of planning, we may do a lot of execution, we may be highly skilled, but the overall outcome at the end of all of this is going to be controlled by Krishna. That is the fundamental aspect. So in Krishna consciousness, what it means is we do everything as if it depends on us, but we leave and have this understanding that Krishna can intervene and the results are what he is going to give us. So we may arrange for everything wonderfully. We may arrange for all the ingredients, and you may try to cook a wonderful meal with all the ingredients and everything else. But then ultimately the resultant is Krishna, who is basically going to arrange for the resultant. Yeah, how it's going to come out, etc., is completely based on the resultant is Krishna. So in a similar fashion, what I'm saying is that when we execute things in life, we always want to do it as if it's our responsibility. So it doesn't mean we neglect things. We do it as if it's our responsibility. But at the same time, we understand that even if you do everything as if it's your responsibility, the ultimate result is going to be given by Krishna. Does it make sense? These are two different things.
Yes, Prabhu, that's clear. Like example of cooking is really clear.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure as to how good a cook you are, but I didn't choose it.
One more, Prabhu, like when you mentioned about
go ahead.
When we deal with someone like who's in deep trouble, so we we used to say like pacify their emotions. But
Correct. Yes.
for example, if the person is, even though we pacify them by emotions, it keeps happening and happening again and again. Again, they, even though we tell them many a times, but still the reaction is same. So how many times we can control and say, just try to pacify emotion?
Well, see, pacification of emotions is not a matter of just talking. Pacification of emotions means that when someone has an emotional issue, you focus on giving them comfort at an emotional level first, giving them affection, giving them support, giving them love. But in reality, when you want to solve problems, you need to empower their intelligence with Shastric conclusions. So them coming in touch with Shastra repeatedly is the way for them to be able to move forward, not the other way around. Yeah. So you can't always help someone who is going to get emotional and they're going to kind of become lost. We need to pacify the emotions so that they have some calmness. And once they are calm, we start giving them Shastric input so that they're able to understand that what is wrong and what is right comes from Shastra. Then the intelligence becomes empowered by Shastric conclusion.
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Sure. Anything else?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Haribol?
Haribol. You mentioned about like principles of austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness, and one of the aspect was like if we perform a lot of austerities, it can lead us to form of pride. So how can we overcome that pride? Because I have witnessed that within myself as well sometimes, when chanting a lot of rounds or doing something extra. So it has I've witnessed that within myself. So how can we overcome that part when we are performing austerities?
Yeah, see, austerities that are performed were for Krishna. Basically, when you perform austerities, we perform it for the pleasure of Krishna. So, for example, one of the ways to overcome pride is to regularly engage in menial service at wherever you are, in whichever temple you belong to. Go to the temple and engage in menial service, because that would automatically help us understand that we are not who we think we are. So this is very important for our purification. So that's very important to practically engage in menial service. That is one. And then the second part is what you just mentioned. The beauty is that we recognize that we have pride, which in itself is a gift of Krishna consciousness. We wouldn't recognize that we have pride if we weren't Krishna conscious. So that itself is Krishna's doing, where he's saying that you have this problem. So once we recognize that we have this problem, then the way you deal with it is by engaging more and more in menial service so that we establish ourselves as servants. And once you establish yourself as a servant more and more, then the opportunity for pride becomes quite diminished.
I see.
So, yeah, there has to be some practical menial service like cleaning the temple, etc.
Right. Okay. And if in case like, okay, it's our own pride, but if we witness this in somebody else, how can we deal with that issue?
If we witness this with somebody else, again, see, it depends on who they are. It depends on who they are. It depends. If it is someone who is very senior, and we can mistake their behavior as being pride or whatever. In the sense, what I'm trying to say is, if it is someone senior to us, then we approach and seek clarification from either their peers or close to them who are the well-wishers, or we simply, what we try and do is we simply, discuss this with their authorities. If they're behaving with pride and they're basically causing some hurt to us.
Okay.
The point I'm trying to make is Krishna consciousness, in Krishna conscious society, it is quite complex because we constantly are being purified. And as a consequence, it's very easy to misassume and assign blame to others. So we have to be very careful in Krishna conscious society because we're constantly being purified. As a consequence, there's always this opportunity and input coming from different places where we start thinking that the whole, everybody is against us and this temple is against us and this is against us, that is against us. We start thinking because we are in purification. So it's always important for us to, one, engage in menial service. So that this way we always remind ourselves that we are basically dasa das anudas. And then we also, if we find that there is something going on which we can't comprehend, then we approach authorities and those whom we have in confidence, someone who knows us well, who is also senior to us, and who has capacity to discern this. You go talk to them and share the details, then they would be able to see what is it and what isn't. You see, very rarely can one see things at their level. Very rarely. It's almost impossible. It's always that consciousness has to be one above for it to be able to take a look to see what's going on. It is always higher consciousness that can see what is going on in the lower consciousness. So we should be very careful if we are constantly finding that something is wrong with people around us. Because if we see that happening too often, then we engage in more and more and more menial service, so that all we are able to see after that is that people are engaging in wonderful service around us. So I'm not saying it's happening to you. I'm just giving you a tip for the future and sharing this with others as well. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Sure. Hare Krishna. Anything else? All right. So I think we will end for today, and then we'll meet the following week. And the next week, I think we're going to be concluding the first canto. And we will see after which what we could do is we could examine and see if there's a necessity for us to kind of touch upon all the chapters in a different way, some kind of a summary class, which might help everyone. So we'll end for today. And if there are any questions, you could come on the WhatsApp group and you could post questions on WhatsApp. I'll be happy to address them if I haven't addressed them here. Okay? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.